for example, there was no evidence of direct drug use then. And there's a lot of questions, and I think it's important to recognize, setting aside your emotional piece of this, because everyone probably knows somebody who has an addiction some way or another, either directly or a family member or through somebody else. But keep in mind, for example, a controlled substance is marijuana with the federal law, and states are changing their laws. So what's going to happen going forward? If you're a marijuana user, it's a controlled substance. It may be legal in New York State, for example. But if you're waking up in the morning and smoking marijuana and smoking it at night, and you're getting that firearm, are you now violating the law? That's one of the reasons why you don't see this law very often prosecuted on an island like it was here, despite the argument that the DOJ is really doing Biden's bidding. You're seeing someone prosecuted for a crime that's not that frequently prosecuted alone. So this is a really, obviously a case that's going to be shining a light on it, because we had Donald Trump and there's more to go with Hunter Biden. Decision on a similar matter regarding the drug use and possession of a firearm. So this is not over yet.
That is really interesting. And also, Hunter Biden has attracted kind of unlikely bedfellows. I read this morning that gun rights activists have been flocking to his cause. Jeremy, though, let me just stick with you. This trial almost never happened. It was part of a plea deal that fell through last summer. If I can refresh your memory, can you talk a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, the judge, the most simplest way to look at it is the judge said, no, this is a no-go. And there was an issue about what that plea would cover and not cover. So that's why it fell apart. And I think to that point, when there was questions about Hunter Biden testifying, not only was there a risk of him permitting or causing perjury by saying certain things that are inconsistent and that were lies, he could have exposed himself to those tax crimes that were involved in the initial case, now that are going to be tried in September. So it all fell apart before this judge saying, well, I'm not going to agree to this. And the judge ultimately has that right to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Taylor, if I can, yep, and Hunter Biden that is a live picture, folks, of Hunter Biden leaving the courthouse. Not a very good one. The press was not put in a particularly advantageous area, but he has left the courthouse and he is going into his waiting SUV there. And I should note that he did not speak. We can only imagine that perhaps his lawyers will. Certainly the president, in some way, even if it's terse, will have to respond in some respect. And do we have Taylor?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, Taylor, let me just ask you about the political angle to this, because one can't remove it. Obviously, Hunter Biden is not a government official, but he is the first son. Only weeks after someone who was a government official and wants to be again, that is the former president, was convicted in state court. Is there any way or any thoughts that you have now about how this, if it does, plays in the minds of voters as they consider who to elect, the current president or the former president?
Well, it's interesting. I've been to almost a dozen states in the last, I think, 8 months, and I've spoken with dozens of voters about the Biden family, about the Trump family. What I think is worth remembering is just the unprecedented nature of both of these scenarios, where former President Trump became the first ever U.S. president to be convicted of a crime, and now Hunter Biden becomes the first ever child of a sitting U.S. president to be found guilty of crimes. So people are not necessarily following the day in and day out, bit by bit, minute by minute, drip, drip of these cases, but they end up seeing these headlines, and a lot of voters I've spoken with tell me they're frustrated because they see families that are either involved in bad business, or it shows a lot of people have alleged they feel that the Justice Department is either politically skewed or politically motivated, no matter the case. I think what will be really interesting moving forward for Donald Trump and his campaign is they have pointed to his conviction in New York and the other charges he's facing in his 3 other cases as purely politically motivated attacks from the Biden Justice Department, even though some of those cases, like in New York and like in Georgia, were state-driven cases that the Biden administration had no involvement in. Now, how can they point and sit there and say the president's own son has been found guilty of crimes and convicted by a jury in a case brought by his own government government, in theory, you have to wonder if that will have an impression on voters. I think for President Biden himself, there's been so much reporting about how much of a family man he is and how closely intertwined he is with his family members as they've dealt with multiple tragedies and struggles throughout the years. It was notable seeing throughout the last week put up at this courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, in support of Hunter. While the president did not show up, First Lady Jill, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
No, yeah, you were going to say First Lady. I just wanted to underline what you just said. We only have a couple of minutes left. Is that this case was actually brought? It was brought by a special counsel, but it was brought by the Biden Justice Department. The Trump case was not brought by the Biden Justice Department, although he is facing charges elsewhere, also by a special counsel. The nuance in this, which I think is deeply important, sometimes gets lost. Jeremy, let me just turn to you for just a moment, because this is also really important. Do we think that Hunter Biden will be imprisoned? He's facing an awful lot of time behind bars.
You know, again, to the point I made before, you don't see many people just charged with this case this offense when it's not tied to something greater or bigger scheme. I would think that, there should be a good chance he does not get incarcerated. The judge does not put him in. There's going to be a pre-sentencing memorandum. There's going to be pre-sentencing. So there's still a lot to be done still, and it'll probably be adjourned. I don't know if we heard maybe 60 days out or so, maybe a little bit longer because of who he is. But the follow-up with what was just said is, if anyone is held, frankly, to a different standard, I would argue as a former prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, it's been Hunter Biden has been held to the harder standard, being prosecuted for something that few are prosecuted with. And we look at what was happening with Donald Trump, the things that he was able to do, that if I, as my client, one of my clients did those things, they would have been held in contempt a long time ago. This is disheartening for everybody. And we're not done yet, A, because of the political season, and B, because we still have multiple trials ahead.
Taylor, you have about 15 seconds. Any final words on what we can expect next?
It'll be interesting to see how this appeal process plays out, but when President Biden decides to comment on it, it'll be interesting just to see both how emotional he is and how he chooses to both distance himself from this case, but also embrace his son.
Taylor Popoulos, Jeremy Salan, thanks so much for your time. And more news right now here on Spectrum News.
When I was